So, Senator, I had the opportunity to watch all three of your debates. And I think you clearly stated that you are in favor of H.R. 40, the bill around reparations. What, in your mind, are some possible forms of reparations that could be in play for Black Americans?
Yeah, thank you so much. So Cory Booker introduced that legislation into the Senate. I was his first co-sponsor. Cory Booker has endorsed me in this race for a re-election to the Senate. So I endorsed Cory's bill immediately, months and months ago. It took a while for there to be a third co-sponsor on the bill. But I think it is absolutely imperative that we have this debate about reparations in the United States of America, especially as the Electoral College is called into question. The Electoral College is nothing more than a racist premise that got established as a deal to allow Southern slave owners to get extra congressmen, depending upon how many slaves they had down in South Carolina or Alabama or Mississippi, who would then be elected to vote against the interests of the slaves or the freedmen. That's built into the Constitution. We have to eradicate the Electoral College and so that we can have a true democracy, so everyone's vote counts everywhere, so that Trump can't lose by 5 million votes in the popular vote and still win because of this corrupt system that we allowed to be created and that we call the Electoral College. And so, you know, the idea would be that a national commission would be established. That's the goal that Cory Booker and I have with H.R. 40, so that we would then have this commission begin the convening of all experts, all people who really do believe that this original sin in our society of slavery is something that we deal realistically with. It originated right at the beginning of our country's history, back in 1619, just starts right there. And then we fought a civil war over it. By the way, my great-grandfather came down from New England as a private to fight in the Civil War. And we can track his whole history, you know, of fighting in the South. And now he's spinning in his grave thinking the Confederate generals' statues are still up, the people who are trying to kill me, and we're still fighting that 160 years later. Well, let's have the discussion. Let's have the discussion. Because what happened was in 1876, after that election, they took all the troops out of the South and they allowed them to establish the Ku Klux Klan, Jim Crow laws, and it just went on for another 100 years, all the way up until Martin Luther King began once again to fight for civil rights. So I think it's important for our country to hear the whole discussion of how there was systemic racism, discrimination built into our whole history. And it only is recent, in fact, that we've begun the discussion on education, housing, healthcare, transportation, environment, criminal justice, right? To make sure that we extract those racist premises out of our system. So from my perspective, the reparations bill would look at all aspects of our society. When I was starting law school at Boston College Law School, the year before, they had almost no blacks and almost no women. And then the cities exploded. 1968, cities exploded. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, 10% of our class is black and 10% are women. They went out and recruited. Places called Morehouse and other schools, all of a sudden they're up at Boston College Law School. And women are sitting in the class as well. In 1 year, somehow or other, they were able to find all of these young future leaders in our country. Well, it's a little story, but they had to have a black professor as well. They had no black professors. So they recruited Herbert O. Reed, who was the professor of constitutional law at Howard University, to come up and be our visiting professor. So I'm there day one. first class African-American professor walks in, Herbert O. Reed. And he was Muhammad Ali's lawyer to get back his title.
Really?
He was the second name after Thurgood Marshall on Brown versus Board of Education. He was the lawyer who got Adam Clayton Powell, the African-American chairman of the Education and Labor Committee in the House, reseated. He got kicked out of Congress. So, and he got him reseated. And he would say to us, you know, isn't it interesting that after 200 years, they finally decided that one chairman was really bad enough to kick out, and it was an African-American and the first African-American. So we were, and my father was a milkman for the Hood Milk Company. So I was a commuter to BC, a commuter to BC Law School. And you have all the sons of all the lawyers who were there sitting in class. I don't even know what side of the courtroom defendants and plaintiffs sit on. I don't know anything. So we're in about 2 months, and Professor Reed keeps saying, you got to get standing in order to get your case in court. In order to get your case all the way up to the Supreme Court, you have to have standing. So finally, one of the sons of one of the white lawyers raised their hand and said, Professor Reed, can you give us the definition of standing? And he said, yes, young man, let me tell you, you and all the other white men in this class, you were born with standing. Your job for your whole lives are going to be to get standing for everyone who's not a white man, to make sure their case can be heard, to make sure their grievances can be heard. That's going to be the next 50 years. That's your job. And so that was a big moment for me.
Yeah.
Very clarifying, very simple. Huh? So that's what a reparations debate will help us to do. We've got to get standing. We got to get standing for everybody.
Yeah. I love that. Great story. What a great story, Senator. Thank you for that. So when you think about, I'll speak from a Black perspective. I love hearing you say you want to have an honest dialogue around reparations. The Black community gets a little frustrated when we hear conversations like this, because let me give you an example. The policing bill that just went through the Senate, there was really one Black American that was on that, and that was Senator Tim Scott. And it felt like there was no other voice from the Black community around what do we need from the police. I hope that the reparations conversation won't be so siloed, where it's just one or two Black voices at the table and the rest of us are left out, just innocent bystanders, hoping that it comes back as something we like.
Well, Tim Scott was on the Republican side.
Correct.
And he was working with Mitch McConnell. On our side, there are 47 of us. So what we did was we said to Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, you draft the bill. You tell us what our bill should look like. You tell us what we should be advancing. So the Republicans blocked that bill from being able to be considered. And Cory and Kamala put together a bill, and every one of the members of our caucus wanted to move forward on that broader agenda that I was talking about earlier, in terms of just broad change in the policies in our country. And so it would be gratifying to you so that you could hear our conversations, because we meet a couple of times a week for an hour and a half at a time. And for 2 weeks, the two leaders of the conversation were Kamala and Cory. And we all just were listening. We were hearing and agreeing with them as they were telling us what had to happen. Cory telling us what it's like to grow up as an African-American young man in our country, right? And so it was very, very powerful. These extended hours at a time conversations that we were having. And again, the Republican Party's not ready for that kind of change. Donald Trump's not ready for that kind of change, but I am. And it's why, actually it's why Cory and Kamala and I introduced the abolition of qualified immunities 5 weeks ago. It was the three of us that were the original legislation that was introduced. But that wasn't going to be considered as part of the Republican bill, notwithstanding Senator Scott from South Carolina. That wasn't going to happen. So, so we actually, we're setting up a huge battle here. And I think we're on the right side of history. I think the country is ready for this. I think they can see quite clearly the discriminatory underlying premise of the criminal justice system in our country. The get out of jail free pass, which the police officers who murder innocent people have in our country. And so for me, I think it was a very important month for us to be hearing Cory and Kamala every day talk about what had to happen. And then at the end of the day, we agreed with them on everything. And that's our legislation. And when we win, that will be put right on the floor of the United States Senate.